from Russia to end dollar hegemony. Central banks are snapping up gold this year, but it's unclear which ones are behind the buying spree, fueling speculation that China is a major player, Nikkei Asia reported on November 22. Given that Russia has been hit by Western currency sanctions, China and some other countries must reduce their reliance on the dollar as soon as possible, Nikkei Asia quoted several analysts as saying. According to a report released in November by industry group the World Gold Council, central banks bought a net 399.3 tons of gold from July to September this year, more than 4 times more than in the same period a year earlier. The latest buying is up sharply from 186 tons in the previous quarter and 87.7 tons in the first quarter, while year-to-date buying alone exceeds any full-year performance since 1967. Buyers such as the Turkish, Uzbek and Indian central banks reported purchases of 31.2 tons, 26.1 tons and 17.5 tons, respectively. The problem is that such specific purchases add up to only about 90 tons, which means it's not clear who netted the remaining roughly 300 tons. China probably bought a lot of gold from Russia, said market analyst Itsuo Toshima. China has made similar moves in the past. The Chinese government, which has been silent since 2009, shocked the market in 2015 by disclosing that it had increased its gold holdings by about 600 tons. China has not reported any activity since September 2019. As Russia and Ukraine continue to ramp up, a third major war in the Kherson region is about to be triggered, and neither Russia nor Ukraine must give ground in order to ensure that winter comes and the war situation favors their side. At the same time, the U.S. midterm elections will be held soon, but the U.S. political scene is now showing a very strange phenomenon. In order to gain more support, the candidates of both parties are competing to show who has a tougher attitude toward China, and it seems that anti-China has become the only and the last consensus among the two parties. Together they shouted, "We can no longer be soft on China, it's time for us to fight back against China." And earlier, in the new U.S. national security strategy, China has become the only global competitor that the U.S. needs to prioritize. This makes people wonder how the U.S. excluded Russia when it is clear that the war between Russia and Ukraine is still escalating. In fact, the United States may think that they have eaten Russia and Ukraine no longer possible to negotiate, Europe and Russia, and the reason for the talks is completely cut off, the United States in the increase of aid to Ukraine, quite a kind of bound to force Russia into a desperate situation. At the same time, the United States recently put the center of attention on the head of Iran in the Middle East, shouting to impose severe sanctions on Iran. It is clear that after repeated setbacks in the Middle East, the United States is trying to regain control of their own in the Middle East. The situation has developed to the point where the U.S. has begun to make enemies on all sides internationally and has forcefully started a three-front game to confront China in the Asia-Pacific, Russia in Europe and Iran in the Middle East at the same time. But is the United States really so powerful? I doubt it. Now, we can hardly discuss China, Russia and Iran separately, although all three parties are pursuing an independent, non-aligned foreign policy, but in the face of U.S. aggressive pursuit, China, Russia, and Iran are on a front. This is something the U.S. should know by heart even if it does not want to face it. After all, several U.S. ambassadors for international strategy have made similar warnings: never let China, Russia, and Iran come together, it's not a good thing for the U.S. Some U.S. officials believe that the most important thing the U.S. should do now is to fulfill its commitments in the Middle East and Europe as soon as possible, maintain U.S. dominance in these two regions, and then focus on China. While it is not clear why U.S. politicians are so fond of putting China first, it is clear that the United States has missed the opportunity to fulfill its commitments. In the midst of the panic over the extreme energy crisis, anti-American sentiment among the European public has reached unprecedented levels, with even European leaders like France and Germany, whose leaders have publicly blamed the United States, saying that the U.S. holding is not the behavior of an ally. Although expressed in a more restrained manner, but the discerning eye can hear what the meaning, Europe began to consider the United States is the enemy. In the Middle East, the United States to look a little more wretched, led by Saudi Arabia. Oil-producing countries are no longer the only United States. Iran is in the battlefield to Russia's aid, openly against the United States. It seems that the foundation of American hegemony has been loosened. At the G20 summit in Bali, many heads of state gathered, while Russia, as a member of the 20 countries, Putin was not able to attend. The main reason has a lot to do with the current international public opinion. Before the summit was held, Zelensky repeatedly called out to Russia that there is no Ukraine if there is Russia, plus there is no possibility that the current conflict can be resolved through talks. Moreover, once Putin attends, the U.S. and Western heads of state will inevitably face a condemnation. Combining all these factors, Russia chose to send Foreign Minister Lavrov to participate. As it turns out, the U.S. and the West were only thinking about how to humiliate Russia from the beginning to the end, and the media even made a rumor that Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov was sent to the hospital with a sudden illness. Apparently, the news was reported in a big way by the West to mock Russia for being cowardly at the time of the G20 summit. Even if some countries see through the trick of the US and the West, they are still bent under the hegemony and dare not speak out. Only China stood up for Russia. The Chinese representative even held a direct bilateral meeting with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and said that no one can deprive Russia of its reasonable right to participate in multilateral organizations. This paragraph, to put it bluntly, is for the United States to hear. The United States is the only country that can do this kind of crowding out of other countries by a small circle. And this exclusion storm has even spread to the United Nations. Just recently, the General Assembly passed a resolution to establish a mechanism to compensate Ukraine for the damage caused by Russia using frozen Russian property plus cash. The vote was passed with 97 votes in favor, 73 abstentions, and 14 votes against. Many online analyses say that this vote is meaningless and that Russia has a veto, but in reality, this vote is an attitude. It can be seen that among the 14 votes against the resolution, 14 countries, including Iran, Cuba, and Syria, stood behind China and Russia, which ultimately means that the General Assembly's resolution procedure is not fair and intends to exceed the mandate of the UN General Assembly. Geng Shuang, Deputy Permanent Representative of China to the United Nations, made it clear that the victims have the right to demand compensation, but it is clear that this issue is not an issue that can be discussed in the General Assembly, and the United States is trying to turn the United Nations into a tool to control others without being constrained by others, and once implemented, the consequences will be endless. Now it seems that the current situation in Russia can be described as internal and external problems. And China 2 times strong support, in addition to the fair treatment of Russia to speak out, in fact, is also to maintain the existing international order. This time China does not speak out, so that the United States to the hegemonic acts of sitting, so China not only to speak out, but also to unite more countries to counter the U.S. imperial hegemony.